Inglay Lee, who was 36 years old, was originally from China but lived in Dublin, Ireland, where she went by the name Angie. She started a company called Cinderella Weddings in 2015, offering lots of services for couples getting married, especially for the Chinese community. She was married to Daniel Belling, a 45-year-old IT consultant from Germany. They had 2 sons together. On February 9, 2017, the entire family set off on an 11-day cruise of the Mediterranean on the MSC Magnifica. The cruise began in the port city of Civitavecchia, on the west coast of Italy. When the cruise ended, the ship's security measures showed that one passenger who had boarded the ship never left it. Within a few hours, they were able to determine that the passenger had been someone in the Lee Belling family. The cruise line notified police that they had a missing passenger. The police located Daniel Belling in an airport in Rome, about to board a Ryanair flight back to Dublin with his sons, but not his wife. Suspicious of the fact that Belling had not reported his wife missing, despite the fact that she disappeared partway through the cruise, the Italian authorities took him into custody. Angie and Daniel's sons, ages 4 and 6, were placed in the care of Italian social services and were eventually released to their paternal grandparents in Germany. The last known person to see Angie outside of her family was the clerk in a souvenir shop on the cruise ship. On February 10th, the second day of the cruise, Angie had been in the shop with her 2 boys. According to the shop clerk, Daniel Belling had stormed into the shop and threw a pair of sneakers at his wife, telling her to put them on in place of the sandals was wearing. The clerk said that Angie looked shaken after the encounter. For the remainder of the cruise, Daniel and the children ate all their meals on board the ship without Angie. Daniel also told the ship's housekeeping staff to stop turning down the fold-out bed in the family's 11th deck cabin because there were only 3 people staying in the room instead of 4. Appearing before an Italian judge after being taken into custody, Daniel claimed that his wife had been on the ship for several more days after she was last seen, until the ship docked at Katakalin in Greece. He said that he and his wife had argued the night before, and she had mentioned wanting to quit the cruise. He took their sons out for an excursion in the morning, and she was not in their cabin when they arrived back to the ship later in the day. Her luggage and mobile phone were gone. Daniel assumed that Angie had left to return home to Dublin. He says that it was at this point in the trip that he told the housekeeping staff to no longer turn down the fold-out bed not earlier in the trip, as the staff had reported. He believed his wife to either be back at their home in Dublin or with family in China. There was no record of Angie's passport being used for international travel, and she never arrived back in Ireland or in China. The family's cabin was also near a terrace that overlooked the ocean, but did not provide a relaxing atmosphere because of the loud noise of the ship's engines. It is possible that Angie's belongings could have been thrown overboard from this terrace to make it look as though she had left on her own accord. Angie's mother was not notified that her daughter was missing by Daniel Belling or the Italian authorities. She only learned of Angie's disappearance when a friend of hers who spoke English happened to see a story about the case on the internet. She was distraught over the news and was sure her daughter had not willingly walked away from her life because she would have never abandoned her children. She is also a staunch supporter of her son-in-law, however. She acknowledged that Daniel and her daughter argued frequently, but believes Daniel to be a good person who would not have hurt his wife. Angie and Daniel were described as odd by some of their neighbors, who also confirmed that the couple had a tempestuous relationship. One neighbor reported once finding Daniel sleeping in their apartment building stairwell, following a fight with Angie. Daniel Belling was held in an Italian jail for 14 months while Italian authorities worked to build a case against him. When they failed to produce enough evidence to bring him to trial in relation to his wife's disappearance, he was released at the end of April 2018. He returned to Dublin and the apartment he had once shared with his missing wife. Since the apartment was being left vacant, Angie's mother had moved into the apartment weeks before. She remains convinced of her son-in-law's innocence. Daniel told reporters after his release that he was sure his wife was back in China. He says he was worried about her for the first few weeks following her disappearance, but was not concerned anymore. He claimed not to be angry with her, but described her as cruel for allowing him to sit in jail for over a year. Angie remains missing. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. Christopher Caldwell was a father of 3 daughters from Virginia Beach, Virginia. He was engaged to be married to a woman named Crystal Tinder and had a wedding date set for July of 2005. In July of 2004, the couple went on a Carnival cruise from Miami, Florida to Cozumel, Mexico. On the final night of the cruise, July 22nd, they had dinner with another couple they had made friends with during their time on the ship. Afterwards, the group had a few drinks and visited some of the ship's nightclubs. Crystal and the other couple were ready for the evening to end, but Christopher was not ready to turn in for the night just yet. He told his fiancée that he was going to go to the ship's casino and would join her back in their cabin shortly. Crystal went back to the cabin alone and went to sleep. Crystal woke up at 6:30 a.m. on July 23rd. Christopher was not there, and she realized that he had never made it back to their cabin. She searched various areas of the ship on her own, but with no success. She then had him paged to the information desk, but receiving no response, she notified ship personnel that he was missing. Video surveillance showed Christopher leaving the casino at 2:17 a.m. Crew members were interviewed and a bartender claimed to have seen Christopher on the ships. He said that Christopher appeared highly intoxicated. Christopher's family has been highly critical of the bartender's decision to leave Christopher alone in such a state. Given this sighting, it was feared that Christopher had fallen overboard, approximately 14 miles off the shore of Florida. The Coast Guard was notified and began searching for Christopher. However, the cruise line did not notify the Coast Guard until after the ship docked and the passengers were all gotten off of the ship, a process which took 3.5 hours. According to Crystal, Carnival personnel were more concerned with getting passengers from her cruise off the ship and bringing the next group of passengers on board than they were with looking for Christopher or getting help from the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard performed an exhaustive search of the area but found nothing. When Christopher went missing, he was 8 days shy of his 37th birthday. No sign of Christopher has ever been found. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. 47-year-old Fariba Amani was a mother of 2 adult children from Port Moody, British Columbia. In February 2012, she went on a cruise on the Bahamas Celebration, a ship operated by Celebration Cruise Lines, with her boyfriend of 8 months, Ramiz Gulshani. The cruise ended on February 29th when the ship docked in Palm Beach, Florida at 7 a.m. Ramiz awoke in the couple's cabin around the same time the ship docked, but he realized that Fariba was not there with him. He searched the ship for an hour and then notified the ship's crew that she was missing. Ramiz says that he saw Fariba for the last time at 1 a.m. that morning in the ship's gift shop. He then went to the ship's casino by himself before returning to their cabin and going to sleep. It does not appear that he was concerned that Fariba was not there when he came in to go to bed. Customs officials confirmed that Fariba had gotten back on the ship after the cruise's stop at Freeport in the Bahamas, around 8 p.m. on February 28th, because she had scanned the card issued to her by the cruise line in order to get back on board. The Coast Guard launched a 3.5-day search of the waters between Florida and the Bahamas. The search covered more than 10,000 square miles but turned up no sign of Fariba. Fariba's family believes that foul play is involved in her disappearance. They say that she did not disappear willingly because she would not have left her children. Also, she was a successful esthetician, with clients and events booked for several months. Her family also says that she was not a heavy drinker, so it is unlikely that she accidentally fell overboard while intoxicated. Shortly after Fariba's disappearance, her family publicly expressed frustration with Fariba's boyfriend, Ramiz. Ramiz had never actually met Fariba's family during their relationship and would not speak with them after Fariba went missing. According to Ramiz, this was because of the extreme emotional stress he was under, worrying about Fariba. In an interview on the first anniversary of Fariba's disappearance, her sister Saluma clarified that the family was not accusing Ramiz of anything, but they were frustrated about the lack of communication with him because he could have potentially had important information. Ramos told the media that he had been cleared by the FBI, but the FBI could not confirm this due to the ongoing nature of their investigation. Fariba and Ramos did not have an ideal relationship. Fariba told her family that Ramos was very controlling and needed to be told of her every move. She had consulted with a private investigator about surveilling Ramos because she suspected he was unfaithful, but had ultimately decided not to hire him due to fears about her physical safety if Ramos discovered she was having him followed. She considered the cruise to be one last-ditch effort to see if the relationship could work and was prepared to end it upon their return home if the vacation did not improve things between them. Fariba's family is still fighting for answers in her case, but she remains missing. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. 20-year-old Blake Kepley of Fallbrook, California, was making plans for his future in 2011. He was researching technical schools and local colleges as well as considering joining the military, trying to decide what path he wanted to take for his career. He took a break from these preparations to attend a family reunion for his father's side of the family in July. The reunion was taking place on an Alaskan cruise. The Holland America Line ship departed from Seattle on July 17th to make stops in British Columbia and various locations in Alaska. At 2:30 p.m. on Friday, July 22nd, Blake's family reported him missing to Holland America personnel. They claimed to have last seen him sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. that morning, and he had not been in his room when they woke up. The family had searched for him on their own, but could not find him on board. The ship arrived in Ketchikan, Alaska that morning, but gangway records do not show Blake leaving the ship. Fearing that Blake had gone overboard, the cruise line contacted the Coast Guard. Helicopters and boats searched an area of more than 350 miles for Blake, but found nothing. The search was formally called off late in the afternoon of the 23rd, and the ship arrived back in Seattle on the 24th. Blake's mother, Mary Larson, had been told that there was no surveillance footage of Blake. She had to wait 3 months before she received any information about her son's disappearance in the form of the Coast Guard report on the incident. The report did not answer many questions, however. It featured a blurry surveillance image of an individual whose face was blurred out and a few witness statements from individuals who claimed to have seen Blake, but their names had been redacted, leaving Mary with no leads to follow. Mary has gone on to advocate for passenger safety on cruise ships, but has not found any answers in her son's case. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Angelo Filippa was the first chef in Sabatini's restaurant on board Princess Cruise Line's Coral Princess. The 31-year-old was a native of Cremona, Italy, and had worked for Princess Cruise Lines since 2006 on their cruises of the Caribbean. In November 2009, he was working for them on a 6-month contract that finished in February 2010. The Coral Princess left Florida on November 23rd and was scheduled to make several stops before arriving in Los Angeles. On November 25th, Angelo began his shift at Sabatini's at 4:30. At 8:15 that evening, he was seen walking into the kitchen from the dining room after going out to speak with 2 passengers. His coworkers saw him get on an elevator that went to areas only accessible by staff. They were most often used by workers in the kitchen when they were going to dispose of garbage. Angelo never returned to the kitchen, despite the fact that his shift did not end until 10 p.m., and he was a reliable worker. One of Angelo's coworkers noticed that he was missing around 9 p.m. and told the kitchen manager about it. But the kitchen manager did nothing. Nothing was done about Angelo's disappearance until 9 a.m. the following morning. Princess Cruises claims to have no useful surveillance footage of Angelo around the time of his disappearance, and they deleted the record of passengers who ate in Sabatini's at night after Angelo's family expressed interest in contacting them to see if any of them had helpful information. While the corporate headquarters of Princess Cruises is in California, it flags its cruise ships out of Bermuda, allegedly to avoid taxes and escape the U.S.'s more stringent safety regulations. Therefore, investigating Angelo's disappearance falls under the jurisdiction of authorities in Bermuda. According to Angelo's family, they have shown no interest in investigating his case. They did not arrive on the ship until 10 days after Angelo's disappearance and did not examine basic evidence for months. At the end of January 2010, they told Angelo's family in an email that they had not yet examined Angelo's cell phone or computer. They also only talked to one of Angelo's co-workers at the restaurant, the same one who had raised concern about his whereabouts on the night of the 25th while they were on the ship. This co-worker also shared crew quarters with Angelo and reported that Angelo had never arrived back there on the night of the 25th. Despite this, the investigators from Bermuda believed in unconfirmed sighting of Angelo on Deck 7 of the ship by another crew member at 6:30 a.m. on the morning of the 26th. If Angelo were still on board the ship in the morning, where had he been all night? Angelo's family was eventually able to get back his computer and have it professionally analyzed. They learned that the computer continued to be used for several days after Angelo went missing, and emails were deleted. It is unknown who used the laptop and did all of these things. Angelo's family began receiving upsetting phone calls insinuating that Angelo had witnessed illegal activities on board the ship and was gotten rid of by other workers on the ship, which does seem likely given the tampering with his computer. Angelo's sister Kiera continues to put pressure on authorities and seek answers about what happened to her brother. But Angelo remains missing. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. On March 21st, 1951, in the early afternoon, a Douglas C-124 Globemaster cargo plane belonging to the 2nd Strategic Support Squadron departed from Walker Air Force Base in Roswell, New Mexico. Its destination was RAF Mildenhall, an RAF base in Suffolk, England. Before crossing the Atlantic, though, the plane made 2 stops. The first stop was at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where it picked up 5 important members of the Strategic Air Command staff. Among them was Brigadier General Paul Thomas Cullen, who was second in command of the 2nd Air Force. The senior staffers, as well as the highly trained group of servicemen who were traveling with him, were on their way to England to help establish the 7th Air Division, which would lead any aerial assault against the Soviet Union should the need arise. The plane took off from Barksdale around 10:30 that night and headed for the Limestone Air Force Base in Maine for its final stopover to refuel. When it took off in Maine for the final leg of its journey, the plane was carrying 53 members of the Air Force, 44 who were passengers, and 9 who were serving as crew members for the flight. At 1 p.m. on March 23rd, the plane radioed Mayday to the United States Coast Guard cutter, Casco, a weather ship. The plane had a fire in one of its cargo crates that the crew could not get under control. Major Robert S. Bell, who was commanding the flight, made the decision to ditch the plane. Ditching is when a pilot tries to make a controlled emergency landing on water, rather than waiting for his plane to crash into it. While ditching is very dangerous, Major Bell seemingly executed it perfectly, and the plane remained in one piece in the water. The evacuation of the plane was also executed impeccably. There was enough emergency equipment for the full number of people on board the plane, and many of them had been trained extensively for such a situation. All 53 people on board survived the ditching and put on life preservers and made it into the plane's inflatable life rafts, which carried food, water, radios, signal flares, cold water equipment, and other necessary provisions. The plane radioed all of this information to the Casco, as well as the exact coordinates of where the plane ditched, which placed it approximately 450 miles off the coast of Ireland. The successful ditching of the plane was confirmed by a KB-50 bomber that was dispatched from RAF Lake and Heath to the coordinates provided by Major Bell. The bomber's crew located the ditching site and saw the intact plane as well as the life rafts with the men inside of them. The bomber was not equipped to rescue the men, but it confirmed to the Casco that they had the right coordinates as the ship was on its way to rescue the 53 men. The bomber then had to return to England before it ran out of fuel. While the handling of the in-flight emergency was seemingly as ideal as possible up until its point, the actual rescue effort never succeeded. When the Casco arrived at the ditching site on March 24th, there was no sign of the plane, the life rafts, or any of the 53 men. An extensive search was conducted of the area, with ships and aircraft from both United States and British militaries participating in the effort. No person was ever found, nor were any of the life rafts. Approximately 80 small pieces of wreckage, mainly pieces of plywood, were eventually discovered during the course of the search, but no large pieces of the plane itself. Analysis of the pieces of plywood found confirmed that they had been exposed to fire, but it could not be determined if the fire occurred while the plane was in the air or after it hit the water. Chemical analysis showed traces of chemicals consistent with incendiary bombs used during, but such devices were not on the official cargo manifest of the flight. The official cargo on board was mainly empty fuel tanks. These incendiary bombs were allegedly used by the intelligence community in the early 1950s, which means they could have been in the cargo, but not listed on official manifests. While a few of the lifeboats could have been swept too far away from the ditching site to ever be found, the fact that all 53 men disappeared, and there was absolutely no sign of the plane left, created suspicions that the crew had been interfered with after they went into the water. Given the state of the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union at the time, there were concerns that the plane had been brought down by the Soviet military and all 53 servicemen had been taken prisoner. The senior staff members, particularly Brigadier General Cullen, all had knowledge of highly sensitive information that would have been exceptionally valuable to the Soviets. The rest of the passengers and crew were mainly from the elite 509th Bomb Wing, which was vital to America's nuclear weapons program. Soviet submarines and ships were reportedly active in the area at the time the plane went down. Even if the Soviet Navy did not bring the plane down, it is possible that they came upon the scene and simply took advantage of the opportunity they had come across. Retired Air Force Master Sergeant Keith Amsden, whose brother Robert is one of the 53 men who went missing, has a different theory about who made the men and all the physical evidence disappear. They found something, he told reporter John Andrew Prime. I think it was a broken arrow. Nobody wants to touch this thing. They're scared to death of it, and I don't know why. I firmly now believe that they were carrying a nuclear weapon. A broken arrow refers to some sort of accident involving nuclear weapons. C-124s frequently transported nuclear weapons, so the missing plane would have been equipped to carry one. The Air Force had a documented broken arrow event in 1950, and a second one just a year later could have made the United States look weak on the international stage. The pressures the Cold War put on the military may have led the Air Force to cover up the evidence of a lost nuclear weapon during its covert transport. Keith Amsden's belief that there was a nuclear weapon on board the plane stems from the fact that the official search was abruptly halted and then started up again a day later. This day-long window would give the Air Force time to get rid of physical evidence, and the nation's nuclear program would be only one of a few things of a high enough importance to merit such actions. The fate of the plane and its passengers still remains unknown, and the mysterious circumstances around the disappearance still raise numerous additional questions. 4 of the 53 missing men from the flight have been honored at Arlington National Cemetery, but the first of these honors was not granted until 2012. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. At 9 a.m. on October 16, 1972, a Cessna 310 operated by Pan-Alaska Airlines took off from Anchorage en route to Juneau. Flying the small plane was Don Juinza, Pan-Alaska's chief pilot. The passengers on the flight were Congressman Nick Begich of Alaska and Hale Boggs of Louisiana, as well as Begich's aide, Russell Brown, who were all going to Juneau for a campaign rally for Begich, who was running for re-election that November. The flight, assuming Junes stuck to the flight plan he had filed, should have taken approximately 3.5 hours. The plane never arrived in Juneau and was declared missing. Almost 100 aircraft, some civilian and some military, were involved with the extensive search for the plane, which covered more than 325,000 square miles of remote and treacherous terrain. Ground searches were also organized to look for the wreckage of the presumably crashed plane. Multiple branches of the military aided in the efforts. Despite a search that lasted for more than a month, no trace of the plane was ever found. Just a month before the plane went missing, an Alaska state statute that required all small aircraft to carry an emergency location transmitter went into effect. This device was designed to send out a signal that would identify the location of a plane in the event that the plane crashed on land. No such signal was ever received from this aircraft. It is possible that this means the plane crashed in water, as the transponders of the time could not operate underwater. However, Don Juanza used a portable emergency locator transmitter rather than one fixed inside of a plane permanently, theoretically bringing it with him on every different plane that he flew. The National Transportation Safety Board found his registered transmitter on a plane in Fairbanks, Alaska. He may have used a different transmitter on his final flight, or the plane flew without one that day. The most logical explanation for the disappearance of the plane is that it crashed somewhere too remote for it to be found. In the absence of the plane itself and the physical evidence it would provide, the reason behind its crash are purely speculative. The plane had been carrying 6 hours worth of fuel, almost double what it would have needed for its journey. So it seems unlikely that the plane simply ran out of fuel and fell out of the sky. The harsh weather of Alaska and the potential it has to cause icing on the wings of planes seems like a reasonable cause for the plane to crash, especially given the fact that the weather conditions on the day of the flight have been described as being barely acceptable for flying, but again, this cannot be confirmed without the plane. Given the fact that 2 members of the House of Representatives went missing on this flight, the possibility that the plane was made to disappear for political reasons resulted in numerous conspiracy theories. As the House Majority Leader with a decades-long political career, Hale Boggs would seem the more obvious target of an attack. Congressman Boggs had served on the Warren Commission that investigated the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. While he publicly defended the commission's controversial findings, rumors persisted in Washington that Congressman Boggs was not satisfied with them and wanted to reopen the investigation. Boggs also had a contentious relationship with the FBI, publicly accusing them of tapping his phone lines and those of several other members of Congress. He claimed to have proof of this accusation, but never made it public. While Nick Begich was a freshman congressman with far fewer political enemies and entanglements, he may well have been the actual target if the Cessna were in fact purposely brought down. Less than a year and a half after the plane he was on disappeared, Congressman Begich's widow Peggy married a bomber with mafia connections named Jerry Max Paisley. They divorced 2 years later. More than 20 years after the Cessna went missing, Paisley was serving a prison sentence for murder when he began cooperating with state authorities investigating unsolved cases. One of the stories he told involved him flying from Arizona to Alaska to deliver a locked briefcase at the behest of a mafia lieutenant just prior to the plane going missing. He and Peggy ran a business with the individual who sent him on this trip. One day, the man got drunk and told Paisley that there had been a bomb in that briefcase and that it had been placed on Congressman Begich's missing plane. State authorities turned this information over to the FBI, but nothing further came from the investigation. Paisley died in prison in 2010. Both Hale Boggs and Nick Begich were re-elected, presumably posthumously, in the November 1972 elections. In January of 1973, the House of Representatives passed resolutions that acknowledged that each of the congressmen were most likely dead in order to make it possible to hold special to find their replacements. Congressman Boggs's wife, Lindy, won the special election held to fill his seat and won re-election 8 more times before her retirement from Congress. She was named ambassador to the Vatican in 1997 and served in that capacity until 2001. Congressman Begich's successor was John Young, his defeated opponent in the 1972 election. Congressman Young still holds the seat and has announced that he will be running for his 25th term in 2020. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. On the evening of June 23, 1950, Northwest Airlines Flight 2501 took off from New York City's LaGuardia Airport, bound for Seattle. The flight had planned stopovers in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Spokane, Washington. The plane was a DC-4 that was originally manufactured for the United States military, but was sold off to the private sector after the end of World War II, coming to Northwest in 1947. The plane at first served its original purpose, operating as a cargo plane for the airline, but in May of 1950, it was converted to carry 55 passengers. This particular flight was sold to capacity and also carried 2 pilots and a stewardess. The last contact with the plane came just after midnight on the 24th when the plane, which had been flying over Michigan at an altitude of 3,500 feet, requested to descend to just 2,500 feet due to severe weather along their flight path. When the pilots were given their weather briefing earlier in the evening, this storm had not been forecast. There were other planes in the area at 2,500 feet at the time, so air traffic controllers rejected the request. The flight crew then acknowledged that they had to remain at 3,500 feet. While these altitudes seem impossibly low to modern travelers, this DC-4 was not pressurized like modern aircraft and had to remain below 10,000 feet in order to safely transport passengers. The plane failed to make contact with air traffic control in Milwaukee 20 minutes later, as it should have. The flight was hailed on all frequencies by all the towers in the region, but it could not be reached. The plane had disappeared over Lake Michigan. At the time, the presumed deaths of the 58 people on board the flight made the loss of Flight 2501 the worst commercial aviation disaster in American history. The Navy, Coast Guard, and the state police from 4 different states joined forces to search Lake Michigan for the plane. After the sun went up, sonar equipment and divers were brought in for an underwater search. 2 oil slicks were seen on the lake, which helped narrow down the search area to the eastern side of the lake. The bottom of the lake was dragged in hopes of pulling something to the surface, but the effort did not reveal any evidence. An area larger than the state of Vermont was searched within the first 2 days. The plane was never located. Some debris was found off the coast of South Haven, Michigan. However, it was mainly pieces of the plane that could float like seat cushions. Also recovered were pieces of clothing, blankets, and a rag doll. Without larger and more critical pieces of the plane, investigators were unable to determine what brought it down. Small pieces of human remains also began washing ashore in South Haven, but no full bodies were ever recovered. The pieces that were recovered were buried together in 2 communal graves in South Haven and nearby St. Joseph, both of which went unmarked until they were rediscovered in 2015 and 2008 respectively. With the location of the plane and the reason for its crash shrouded in mystery, numerous theories about the missing plane were put forth. Everything from the plane flipping over to it exploding to alien abductions have been theorized over the years. The Michigan Shipwreck Research Association has performed annual searches of Lake Michigan in hopes of locating the plane, with new individuals with more advanced equipment joining the effort over time. The searches can only take place during a limited period of time each year because the equipment used in them only functions while the water in the lake is within a certain temperature range. While the MSRA has failed to locate Flight 2501, they have discovered 10 shipwrecks in the course of their searches. In 2018, the MSRA shifted its search area further south in Lake Michigan. Previous efforts to locate the plane were based on the flight's intended flight plan. The shift was a result of a theory put forth by Valerie Van Heest, director of the MSRA and author of a book about Flight 2501. She believes that the pilots of Flight 2501, after being denied their request to change altitudes to avoid the severe weather they were experiencing, diverted south to avoid the storm, but inadvertently flew into the worst of it and crashed. To her, it is important to find the missing plane and confirm this theory because it will prove that the pilots were working hard to navigate out of the storm and save the plane and all their passengers until the very last moment. Van Heest is in contact with almost all of the families who lost someone on Flight 2501, all of whom still look forward to finally getting answers about what happened to the plane and their loved ones. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Alice Corbett was the daughter of James and Emma Corbett and grew up in Utica, New York. In the autumn of 1925, she was a third-year student at Smith College, a respected women's liberal arts college in Northampton, Massachusetts. On the morning of Friday, November 13, 1925, Alice was spotted leaving her dormitory at around 8 a.m. She was dressed in a dark outfit, but what caught people's attention was her bright yellow rain jacket. She was never definitively seen again. Alice's friends became concerned when she did not return to her dormitory by the late afternoon and decided to take a look in her room. There, they found an unsealed letter addressed to Alice's mother, which they took to the college warden along with their concerns about Alice. According to the warden, Mrs. Laura W.L. Scales, the letter indicated that Alice was in a confused state of mind when she wrote it. The full text of the letter was not released, but it concluded with the line, "I am coming home." Alice had no previous history of mental health problems. She was also a good student with a clean college record. A few other students reported that Alice had not been in good spirits the week before she went missing, but the change in her mood was not so dramatic as to really concern them. Other letters found in her room indicated that Alice had been arguing with her boyfriend, Thomas Sterling, who was a student at Amherst College, which could have explained the change in her mood. Mrs. Scales contacted the superintendent of grounds and buildings for the college, Franklin King, who organized a search of the campus. When it was unsuccessful in finding Alice, the local police were notified, who in turn brought in state authorities by that evening. A wire was sent to Alice's parents in Utica informing them of her disappearance, and they arrived on campus the following morning. Paradise Pond near the campus was drained, and students helped search the woods for Alice with no success. Her description was broadcast over local radio stations, and her father offered a $500 reward for information that led to her discovery. The reward would ultimately double to $1,000. Alice's favorite hiking trail was on Whiting's Peak in the Mount Tom State Reservation. The idea that she may have gone to this place that she loved was strengthened by a reported sighting of her on the morning of the 13th, shortly after she left her dormitory. Alice's boyfriend Thomas had been at East Hampton, a town bordering the reservation, showing Alice's picture around as part of the early search for her. The town druggist, Mr. McGowan, told Thomas that he had seen the girl in the photograph around 9:30 a.m. on Friday the 13th and had sold her a pimento cheese sandwich and some ginger ale. She had a yellow rain jacket with her. According to Alice's father, she had been particularly fond of this type of sandwich. Helped search the trails on the reservation the day after Alice went missing, but turned up nothing related to her case. Whiting's Peak was searched a second time on November 21st after a group of telephone linemen came forward with a possible sighting of Alice in the area on the 20th, a week after she went missing. According to the linemen, a young woman with dark bobbed hair and a yellow rain jacket had approached them asking for food around noon. The girl had also been carrying a revolver. The men gave her a few sandwiches and some coffee, which she devoured quickly. They asked her what she was doing with the revolver, to which she simply replied, "I might need to use it." The young woman then disappeared into the woods. The crew of linemen had been out working on the mountain for some time and therefore had not heard about Alice's disappearance, so they did not try to detain the young woman. When they learned of the missing student the following day, they reported their sighting to the police. When he was shown a picture of Alice, the foreman claimed that she was the young woman they had seen. Another witness came forward with a potential sighting of Alice in the same area. Joseph Wainwitz told police that he and a friend had been walking along the ridge trail in Whiting's Peak that had been Alice's favorite hiking trail. They came across a young woman lying on her stomach. She brandished a revolver and told them to get away from her. Frightened, they complied. This incident took place approximately 1 hour after the telephone linemen had their encounter with the young woman believed to be Alice. Police were for some reason less convinced that the woman Joseph saw was Alice, arguing that she was probably just another hiker who was scared of being alone in the wilderness with two men she did not know. A store clerk in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, was certain that he had sold Alice and an unknown young man a bridal bouquet on the night of Saturday, November 14th, and wired her father about his sighting of her as soon as she had left his shop. The bride and groom had gotten a marriage license and then arrived at the home of a local pastor at 9 p.m., asking him to perform their wedding ceremony, which he did. The bride and groom provided both the local registrar who issued the marriage license and the pastor with names and addresses that proved to be fake. The bride reportedly bore a striking resemblance to Alice, but the groom and the two witnesses to the marriage were never identified. Dozens of other potential sightings of Alice were reported throughout Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut. Witnesses all around this area confirmed that they had seen Alice upon being shown her photograph, but the times and locations of these sightings make it physically impossible for all of them to be accurate. While most of the people who came forward with information genuinely thought their information to be helpful to the case, the publicity Alice's disappearance received also resulted in more sinister individuals reaching out to her family. The Corbetts received numerous cruel letters, either fabricating hoaxes or mocking the loss of their daughter. At least 2 fake Alices were presented to the Corbetts in hopes of collecting the promised reward. The heartache these actions brought did not deter the family and their efforts to find Alice. A popular theory about Alice's disappearance involves another tragic event that also occurred the Friday the 13th that Alice went missing. That morning, Jane M. Robison, a Smith College senior, originally from Elizabethtown, North Carolina, was found dead in the kitchenette on the 3rd floor of her dormitory. Jane had apparently been in the kitchenette to do her ironing and had turned on the gas stove. Before she could light the stove, she fell and hit her head, either because she tripped or because she fainted for an unknown reason. She lost consciousness from hitting her head and asphyxiated overnight due to the carbon monoxide in the fumes given off by the stove. Jane had closed the door to the kitchenette, and the doors to the bedrooms on the floor near the kitchenette had already been closed because she was doing her ironing late at night, so no one else smelled gas until the morning, when it was too late to help Jane. Carbon monoxide, once inhaled, enters the bloodstream and binds to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is responsible for carrying oxygen throughout the body. If a hemoglobin molecule has carbon monoxide bound to it, it cannot carry oxygen to the different tissues in the body, including the brain. This is why having high concentrations of carbon monoxide in the blood can lead to asphyxiation. However, in less severe cases, carbon monoxide poisoning can cause a wide variety of psychological problems due to the decreased amount of oxygen reaching the brain. These include confusion, mood swings, impaired judgment, and personality changes. Given Alice's reported mental confusion at the time she went missing, it sounds like she could have been suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. Unfortunately, the details disprove this theory. Jane Robson lived and died in Park House. If Alice had been sleeping in one of the rooms near where Jane had her accident, she very well could have been exposed to carbon monoxide. However, Alice, in fact, lived in a completely different dormitory, Clark House, which was not even located near Park House. Jane and Alice were known to be friends. It is unknown if word of Jane's death reached Alice before she disappeared. If it did, it is possible that the stress of the loss of her friend caused Alice to suffer a mental break and walk off campus. The letter Alice had written but not mailed to her mother was written the night before she disappeared, so she was showing signs of mental confusion while Jane was still alive. It is possible that Alice's friend's death could have exacerbated her own condition, but it did not cause it. Alice's disappearance and Jane's death would not be the last tragedies to befall Smith College and its students around this time. On another Friday the 13th in January of 1928, Frances Smith, a freshman at the college, went missing. Her body was discovered more than a year later, but the cause of death was not revealed to the public. And Morrow was friends with Frances and wrote of her in her journals, and married famed aviator Charles Lindbergh a year after her graduation from Smith College, and in 1932, their infant son was a victim of one of the most infamous crimes of the 20th century. Alice's parents continued searching for their daughter well after the publicity surrounding her case died down and the official searches by police ceased. James Corbett hired men to search rivers and advertised the reward in the case to hunters going out into the woods at the beginning of hunting seasons, at least through the fall of 1928. These efforts never provided answers about what became of Alice Corbett. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Ani Ashikian was the second of 3 daughters in her family. Originally from Windsor, Ontario, she worked as a self-employed paralegal in Toronto, mostly dealing with traffic court cases. An adventurous soul at 30 years old, she had already explored nearly 30 different countries. While she enjoyed traveling alone, she also embarked on at least 2 international trips with others in 2008. In October of that year, she and her boyfriend, Wendell Walsh, traveled to Costa Rica, Panama, and Nicaragua together. Almost immediately after her arrival home, Ani decided to join 2 of her friends she knew through work on a trip to Asia. At most, there were only 4 days between when Ani decided to make this trip and when she left on it. Ani was adventurous but not irresponsible. She normally did a lot of research before traveling to a new country, so this last-minute trip was surprising to her family. Ani could be spontaneous, but this 11th-hour decision was unusual, even for her. Ani and her 2 friends arrived in Beijing on October 25, 2008. Their plan was to explore the city together, and then Ani's 2 travel companions would continue on to Vietnam, while Ani decided to travel to India instead. There, Ani planned to spend several weeks on a yoga retreat, and then returned to Canada to spend Christmas with her family. Around 12:30 a.m. on October 30th, Ani's two travel companions heard her exiting their hotel room. They did not think this unusual at first. Ani mainly traveled alone and was used to exploring cities by herself. She had previously gone out exploring all night alone. She may have also still been jet-lagged. The middle of the night in Beijing is the middle of the day in Toronto. What Ani's friends did find troubling was her behavior later that morning. Ani returned to the hotel room while her friends were out for the day, took a bath, and gathered her belongings. She then left the hotel room with everything she had brought with her on the trip. She did not leave a note or in any way say goodbye to the two friends she had come on the trip with. According to Ani's sister Rosie, she was a free spirit who hated schedules. She preferred traveling solo and did not like booking tours or group trips with set itineraries. She theorizes that Ani may have left without saying goodbye because she was struggling with making her plans around those of her two friends. It is unknown exactly what Ani did or where she stayed between October 30th and November 9th. At some point, she traveled from Beijing to the city of Xi'an, most likely by train, since there is no official record of her travel. We only know that she was in Xi'an because she arrived in Hong Kong from Xi'an on November 9th on a Dragonair flight. Again, it is unknown where Ani stayed while she was in Hong Kong. Witnesses would later report seeing her around Chungking Mansions on November 10th. Chungking Mansions is one building that houses numerous shops and small hotels, known for providing cheap accommodations for travelers. While Hong Kong itself is generally safe and has a low crime rate, this particular building does not have a great reputation. There is nothing confirming that Ani actually was staying somewhere in the Chungking Mansions. However, surveillance cameras in the Causeway Bay MTR station captured the last known images of Ani just after midnight on November 11th. In the footage, she is seen getting cash from an ATM 2 times. She withdrew a total of 2,800 Hong Kong dollars, which is roughly equivalent to $358 US or $470 Canadian. She was alone in the footage and seemed relaxed, although she did look over her shoulder a few times. Ani's family confirmed that it was her in the footage, but asked that it not be released to the public because they were the last images they had of her. Some of the images were leaked to the South China Morning Post a year after they were taken and are available on YouTube, but will not be reproduced here in order to respect the family's wishes. At 8:30 a.m. on the 11th, Ani sent the last communication she had with her family. She sent her younger sister Susie a text message, asking her to wish their 2-year-old niece a happy birthday. Ani had not used her email account since November 5th, when she sent her last email. It was common for Ani to go a few days without contacting anyone while she was traveling. This did not usually concern her loved ones. According to Ani's boyfriend Wendell, she was a smart woman and an experienced traveler who knew how to take care of herself and take necessary precautions while abroad. Wendell and Susie both emailed Ani after November 11th, but never received responses to their messages. Their concerns grew over the next few weeks. A major sign of trouble came when Ani failed to wish her other niece a happy birthday 2 weeks after she had sent her last text message to the family. Ani's family assumed that she had been in contact with Wendell, and Wendell assumed that she had been in contact with her family. It was not until Wendell spoke with Ani's sister that they realized that no one had been in contact with Ani in almost 3 weeks. Since Ani went missing outside of the country of her citizenship and where her family was, her family first went to police in Canada, who in turn had to contact the Foreign Affairs Department, who then contacted Hong Kong police to report her missing on December 9th. Ani's family has spoken highly of the police in Hong Kong and how seriously they have taken Ani's disappearance. Immigration officials say that Ani never left Hong Kong. However, there is a small chance that Ani may have circumvented the required checkpoints to leave the country by leaving it by boat, since her trip to Asia was so last minute. Ani only had time to get a visa to enter China, and planned to apply for the visa she would need to stay in India for an extended amount of time once she got to Asia. However, she never applied for or received this visa. Since she did not have the visa, there was a remote hope that she was sticking to her plan and had found a way to travel from Hong Kong to India without having to go through customs at any point along the way. Ani had purchased a plane ticket to return to Canada on December 15th on an Air Canada. Authorities were sent to the airport to see if Ani showed up to her scheduled flight. They then had the task of notifying her family that she did not come to the airport or board her flight home. Wendell Walsh traveled to Hong Kong just before Christmas to help search for Ani and meet with the police. He was helped by a group of local volunteers and passing out flyers in the area where she went missing, which advertised the reward for information about Ani that was being offered. Eventually, Wendell had to return to Canada with no new information about his missing girlfriend. Ani's younger sister, Saucy, made similar trips in January and May of 2009, and similarly had no luck in finding Ani. The volunteer efforts to spread the word about Ani's disappearance did generate some potential leads. There were 2 unconfirmed sightings of Ani in Hong Kong long after she stopped communicating with her loved ones. A 19-year-old British student named Luke Pierce came forward claiming to have spoken with a woman who looked like Ani on December 2, 2008, on Kingston Street in Causeway Bay. The woman was lost and asked him for directions on how to get to a nearby IKEA. He walked the woman 1 block over to make sure she saw where it was. After she told him how frustrated she was, having wandered around looking for the store all morning. Once the store came into view, she told Luke that she had her bearings back. The other potential sighting occurred a few weeks after Luke's interaction with the woman looking for IKEA. A witness reported that he had met a woman who matched Ani's description and spoke with a Canadian accent in Wan Chai, sometime around Christmas. Since Ani's entire trip to Asia was unplanned and her diversions to Xi'an and then Hong Kong were made seemingly impulsively, it is possible that she decided to abandon her plans to go to India and stay in Hong Kong through December. However, Hong Kong is an expensive city, and there was no activity on Ani's bank accounts or credit card after the ATM withdrawals on November 11th. The 2,800 Hong Kong dollars she withdrew would probably not have lasted her until Christmas, even if she stayed in the inexpensive hostels she was used to staying in while traveling. Months and then years went on without any sign of Ani or any of her belongings. Her family did not give up on her, however. Her sisters continued making periodic trips to Hong Kong and opened social media accounts to help spread the word about Ani's disappearance. They did not immediately hire a private investigator because they were concerned that it would interfere with the official police investigation. Eventually, they did hire one, a retired police detective named Guy Shearer, to help search for Ani. Guy has been very open to the possibility that Ani voluntarily disappeared, although he is still puzzled by how she could have done so without some sort of record on her bank records, cell phone, or passport. Guy spoke with the authorities in Hong Kong and asked them to formally look into the possibility that Ani had traveled by boat, and therefore not left a trace with customs officials to Macau. Guy believed the search should be turned towards Macau because Ani spoke Portuguese. As a former colony of Portugal, Macau still maintains Portuguese as one of its official languages. However, only approximately 2% of the population actually speaks the language. Guy persuaded the family to turn over Ani's private journal that had been left in Canada. Guy then turned the journal over to a police psychologist because he was concerned about Ani's state of mind around the time she went missing. Guy claims that Ani was acting strangely because of the last-minute trip, the fact that she had closed one of her bank accounts, and her claims to her family that she was moving to Argentina and had a job lined up there. She did not have the necessary visa to move to Argentina. None of these details necessarily indicate that Ani was not well mentally, however. Ani's trip was more last-minute than her normal trips, but was not entirely out of character. Whether her Asia trip was a sign of mental stress on her part is therefore up for debate. Given the fact that she was going on an extended trip, it may well have been necessary for Ani to close one of her bank accounts to finance it. Guy seems to interpret Ani's plans to move to Argentina as strange behavior. While she had not applied for a visa to make this move, her Asia trip and lack of visa for India show that it was not out of character for her to deal with these bureaucratic details at the last possible minute. The move was not some sort of fantasy she tried to parade as real, but a plan she had been discussing and working out the details of for some time. She had traveled to Argentina earlier in 2008, so she had the opportunity to make an informed decision to move there and potentially make contacts that helped her find a job. She was planning to move in January of 2009, and she and her boyfriend had been discussing the possibility of him coming with her. Since she owned her own business, she had the ability to make such a move without giving notice to an employer. More than a decade has passed since Ani went missing with no activity on her cell phone, her financial accounts, or her passport. None of her belongings have ever turned up. Even if she could have somehow managed to make herself vanish so thoroughly, her family does not believe that she would have abandoned the close relationships she had with them. They continue to hold out hope that one day, Ani will come home. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Paul Fugate, aged 41, worked as a law enforcement park ranger at the Chiricahua National Monument in the mountains of southern Arizona. On January 13, 1980, he was the only permanent staff member on duty at the visitor center. Sometime between 2 and 3 p.m., he informed his only coworker, a seasonal employee, that he was going out to patrol some of the nature trails. He asked the coworker to start closing down the center for the day while he was out, if he was not back before 430. According to the coworker, Paul left the visitors center without his radio, heading towards the trails that led to Faraway Ranch, a large area of land recently acquired by the Park Service. He never returned to the visitors center. The following morning, the park superintendent called Paul's wife Dottie to tell her that he was missing. Search teams, canine units, helicopters, and in small planes searched the area for Paul extensively, with no success. Federal, state, and local agencies were involved in the investigation, but none of them found any sign of Paul. The Park Service offered a $5,000 reward for information about Paul's disappearance, and Paul's family promised to match that amount. Within a few years, this amount grew to $20,000. The initial assumption made by the Park Service was that Paul met with foul play. Paul's wife Dottie continues to hold this belief. Dottie believes that her husband happened upon some sort of drug deal out in the wilderness and was abducted in a panic when the dealers saw the badge on his uniform. The Park Service paid Paul's wife a portion of his salary as survivor's benefits when he first went missing. However, the director of the Park Service's Western Region, Howard Chapman, reviewed the case in 1981 and alleged that Paul had not gone missing but had rather abandoned his post. He was therefore formally fired as a park ranger, and Dottie was ordered to pay back the almost $7,000 in payments she had received, plus 11% interest. She was told she could not appeal this decision because such an appeal had to occur within 20 days of an employee's termination, and Paul's termination had been applied retroactively to the date he disappeared, more than a year prior. It took Dottie 5 years of fighting before the National Park Service re-examined the case and had Paul listed as deceased rather than as a deserter in 1986. Dottie received all of the financial benefits she was entitled to. Paul's case was classified as a probable homicide by the Cochise County Sheriff in 1988. On June 19, 2018, the National Park Service tripled the amount of the reward in Paul's case, bringing it up to $60,000. They announced that they had new information in the case that inspired this renewed appeal to the public. They did not reveal what this new information was. The increased reward has so far not brought forth any answers in Paul's disappearance. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Thelma Pauline Melton was known to her friends as Polly. The 58-year-old lived in an Airstream trailer with her husband Bob. They lived in Jacksonville, Florida, but spent several months out of the year in western North Carolina, where they shared a large rented campsite with friends just outside of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Peggy and Bob had only been married for 6 years, but Peggy herself had been coming to the area for over 20 years. On September 25, 1981, Peggy and 2 of her friends from the campsite, Trula and Red, set out for a walk, which was fairly routine for the 3 friends. They left at approximately 3 p.m., walking along the Deep Creek Trail, which took them into the national park. A quarter mile into the park, they went right at a fork in the trail that took them past a campground and picnic area. The group walked a mile past the campground before turning around, pausing so that Polly could smoke a cigarette. On the walk back, Polly suddenly began walking much more quickly and soon got ahead of her 2 friends. She disappeared out of Red and Trula's view over a small hill, and they did not see her again, even after reaching the top of the hill themselves. Assuming that Polly had just kept up her quick pace, they went to Polly and Bob's trailer when they got back to the campsite at 430. However, Bob told them that Polly had not come back, and that he had not seen her since she had left with them an hour and a half earlier. Bob began calling around to friends while Trula and Red retraced their steps on the trail and searched the campground. They did not find any sign of Polly. At 6 o'clock, Polly was reported missing to the park rangers. The park rangers were able to assemble a search team of 25 people to look for Polly that evening. The trail was later closed so that 150 people and a team of search dogs could search for her. That search went on for a week, but was unsuccessful. Polly was very familiar with the trail she had been on when she disappeared, and it was a fairly easy hike, so it was hard to imagine that she had gotten lost or off trail somehow. She was also reportedly terrified of snakes, so her friends did not believe that she would have willingly gone off trail. She was not in good health, but was just under 6 feet tall, so her friends believed that there would have been signs of a struggle on the trail had she been abducted. The most popular theory about Polly's disappearance is that she voluntarily walked away from her life and had made arrangements for someone to pick her up along the trail, which is why she had to walk ahead of her friends. The campground had been very busy the day she went missing, with 50 cars in its parking lot, so a vehicle would not have been suspicious in the area. Polly had lost her driver's license due to medical issues and as such did not carry a key to the station wagon she and Bob owned, which did not go missing with her anyway. If she left the area in a vehicle, another unknown person was involved. Polly's pastor provided some insight into who that other person could be. According to the pastor, Polly had made statements to him that he believed indicated that she was having an extramarital affair, although she never said so outright. He also revealed that Polly had a history of mental health issues which were largely situational and seemingly under control by 1981. However, in addition to her own health issues, Polly was also dealing with the medical conditions of her husband. Bob was 20 years older than Polly and in declining health. The stress of caring for him could have been a motive for Polly to become involved with someone else and choose to run away with them. During her time in North Carolina, Polly volunteered at the Presbyterian Nutrition Center, where she served meals to the elderly. The day before she went missing, Polly had not signed up at the end of her shift to volunteer the following day, despite the fact that she normally worked every weekday. Furthermore, according to the center's supervisor, Polly had asked to use the phone several times that day. In the 4 years she had been volunteering there, she had never previously used the center's phone, as Polly Maid had to be local as no long-distance charges were made to that phone line. It is possible that Polly made these calls to arrange being picked up the following day inside the park. The idea that Polly ran away to start a new life with someone else is undermined by the fact that she left with nothing more than her cigarettes. If she really wanted a fresh start, however, she may not have wanted to take possessions from her previous life, no matter how practical it would have been to take them. The one potential exception to this rationalization, however, would be the prescription medicines she was taking for high blood pressure and nausea, which were left behind. Polly's husband Bob was so upset by his wife's disappearance that he had to be admitted to the hospital the night she went missing. In 1982, Bob, with the help of his sons from a previous marriage, sold the Airstream trailer he had shared with Polly and went to live in a nursing home. Polly Melton has never been found. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Joseph Wood Jr. was an accomplished 34-year-old journalist from a close-knit family in the Bronx. He graduated from Yale with honors in 1990 and had received a grant that allowed him to travel to Ghana to write his first book. Back in New York, he began working as a writer and editor at The Village Voice. In 1996, he left The Village Voice to take a job at the New Press. By 1999, he had also begun work on a new book about the African-American family. On July 7th of that year, Joe traveled to Seattle for Unity 99, a conference for minority journalists. At the first Unity conference at Atlanta in 1994, Joe had met Samini Sengupta, a reporter for the New York Times. The two had become romantically involved and had lived together for several years, but had broken up at the beginning of 1999. They saw each other briefly at the opening ceremonies for the 1999 conference. That night, Joe had dinner with friends and mentioned to one of them that he was planning to visit Mount Rainier National Park the following afternoon to do some bird watching after attending a press breakfast with presidential hopeful Bill Bradley. Joe had loved the outdoors since he was young, progressing through Boy Scouts until he achieved the rank of Eagle Scout, so these plans were very much in line with his interests. Joe was not at any of the conference events from July 9th onward, something his many friends took note of, but were not initially concerned by. When Joe failed to return to New York on July 11th, however, Samini Sengupta began making inquiries into where he was. Having no luck getting a hold of Joe or finding any information about where he might be, she formally reported him missing and hired a private investigator. The private investigator learned of Joe's plans to visit Mount Rainier from the friend he had talked to at dinner the night of the 7th. Authorities located Joe's rented Mercury Marquis and the Longmire parking lot inside of Mount Rainier National Park. A receipt inside of the car revealed that he had entered the park at 12:29 on July 8th. A search for Joe began, but there was a massive area for the search team to cover. The biggest break in the case came on the morning of July 15th, when a man named Bruce Gowman contacted authorities. Bruce had seen an article about Joe's disappearance in the newspaper and came forward with the last known sighting of Joe. Bruce had been hiking on the Rampart Ridge Trail on the afternoon of July 8th. There, he ran into Joe, who was on his way up while he himself was on his way down. At the time, they were at an altitude of roughly 4,800 feet. The two men chatted about the birds they had seen for a few minutes, and Joe asked Bruce about how much farther he could expect to go up the trail. Bruce advised him that he could only go on for another 5 or 10 minutes before encountering a snow bridge that did not look sound. Bruce then continued back down the trail, and Joe continued up, after assuring Bruce that he would be turning around soon. While Bruce's statement was the high point of the investigation because it helped narrow down the search area, the search teams quickly ran into even more problems. Snow and ice were a major issue in the search for Joe. While he had gone on his hike on a warm July day, Mount Rainier had experienced unusually heavy amounts of snow over the winter. Joe had been hiking unpacked down snow at the altitude he was last seen at, and much of it had melted over the several sunny days following his disappearance, leaving no tracks for searchers to follow. The warm weather ended on July 16th when heavy rains brought in cooler temperatures. With the search now being much more dangerous in these conditions, many of the members of the search team were not able to continue on for the day. On July 18th, the National Park Service announced that they were scaling back the search for Joe. Park rangers explained to Joe's family that they believed that he had suffered some sort of accident. When Bruce Gowman saw him, he was wearing a light shirt and did not seem to have any provisions or equipment with him beyond his binoculars and bird-watching book. Even if he had remained alive but immobile somewhere on the mountain, he would have almost certainly fallen victim to hypothermia when the rains and cold temperatures rolled in. In the absence of Joe's remains to prove this theory, Joe's parents have not ruled out the possibility of foul play in his disappearance. Park rangers dismissed this possibility, arguing that if Joe had been in a struggle with someone on the mountain, it would have resulted in scent trails that the dogs used in the search would have picked up. Joe's literary agent raised money amongst Joe's friends to hire a former NYPD detective to work on the case after the search was scaled back. No sign of Joe has ever been found. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.